Okay guys, so right now I am trying to sew my waistband to my skirt. So I've lined up seams here. I've lined up notches, right? And I'm noticing that my skirt, right, there's a little more play, so to speak, than the waistband. Remember that waistband has that interfacing on it, so the interfacing is keeping it stable, keeping it from stretching out. So while I'm sewing, I could stretch this a little bit to get it to match. But what about over here? I can't really stretch that into place, okay? And the more, especially right here, there's a lot more of the skirt, right? If I try to walk it in, see that extra pucker I get here? Okay, that's not going to sew in very well. So now this could be for a variety of reasons. Maybe I didn't take the exact proper seam allowance here. It could just be the way the garment is made. Like the circle skirt pattern, you will have to ease your waistband in. So here's what we're going to do. Remember this stay stitching that we put in the top of our skirt? It was like the very first step we did. Maybe I should rephrase that. I think 2 out of the 3 patterns had you put a stay stitch in. So if you have the facing and the darts in your skirt, you may not need this step. But I'm going to take that thread, I'm going to pull out the bobbin thread a little bit, and I'm just going to tug on it just a little bit. And I'm going to run my finger down and kind of spread out that little gather I've made. Okay, this is known as easing. I'm easing something into the seam, and in doing so, I'm still able to get a very smooth sewing surface. It's not going to pucker, but it's lining up perfectly now with my waistband. So I will have no trouble sewing that there. Now, I'm going to want to do that here. So what I want to do, okay, you can't quite see if but I'm from this seam to this seam is where I need to ease in my waistband. So I want to try to start from the center and work my way out. So I'm going to pin in the center and pin working my way out. So I'm actually going to take this one out. I just wanted to show you. I'm going to take this one out, and I'm just going to leave the pins in where my notches are, because I still want those notches to line up, and I'm going to ease from the seam to the notch, okay? So I'm going to take that bobbin thread, I'm going to pull it a little bit, see how I get that pucker? But then the fabric is like ever so loosely between my fingers. I'm not pulling the thread, I'm actually pulling this gather of the fabric kind of down into the skirt. And at some point, it actually disappears, right? So I need to pull a little bit more. And I'm working this pucker all the way down, right? To that first pin to see now if that will pin in better. And that looks pretty good. Now it's a little puckery here. I'm just going to try to blend that out with my fingers. I'm almost like ever so slightly squeezing my fingers together. You could feel that gather in between your fingers and feel it release. I totally just stabbed myself with a pin. Okay. So I'm going to come back. Again, I'm working from the center out. I'm lining up my edges. I'm making sure there's no major gathers that would, prevent me from sewing smoothly. And I'm working out. So from that notch to that seam. Okay. All right. now I'm going to come back to the other side, and I'm going to do the same thing. So okay, so I'm going to sew this waistband in now. So let's see. I have, there are lines on my machine. I just kind of highlighted the 5/8 of an inch seam guide. Quick reference. Now, if you remember when we sew our stay stitch or our basting stitch, we're using a very wide machine stitch, the biggest that the machine can go, and we're sewing it a 1/2 inch in, so that when I sew my 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, my finished stitch is an 1/8 of an inch in from this basting stitch. Okay, that ensures that this basting stitch won't show on the other side of the fabric. So let's go ahead and sew that eased in waistband. So I'm going to go forward, forward 3, backwards 3. I'm sorry, I'll do it with this hand next time. I'm pulling out my pins. I don't ever want to go over my pins. So as I am sewing, I'm checking the underneath. I'm sort of sweeping my hand to make sure none of the garment is in the way as I sew. I'm holding with my right hand out in front, and I'm guiding with my left hand. I totally just went over a pin. Don't do that. Okay, so I'm going to put my pin in the fabric, and I'm going to lift my presser foot. There was a bit of a pucker starting to happen, and I just wanted to ease that out. Okay, I'm starting to come up to that area that I eased in. Just kind of holding those seams down in place. I'm only doing a couple stitches at a time, and then I'm adjusting my skirt. My skirt is tubular. It has been sewn together. So as I'm sewing, it's kind of all this on this side, right, is getting kind of twisted. So I'm constantly straightening that out to make sure I'm nothing's getting twisted or puckered or really in my way while I'm sewing. Okay, again, I've got a little bit of a pucker right here. I can kind of pull it out, right, grab that top fabric, wiggle it. I can always come underneath, pull my waistband, make sure everything is lining up edge to edge. And remember, this is the area that I eased in. So my waistband underneath has the tendency to kind of pop out. Remember, it's curved a little as well. So a couple stitches, adjust everything. Okay, and I'm about done with that area that I eased in. So when I get to the end, I'm going to back stitch it. Okay. Oops, I went over a pin again. Don't tell on me. The reason we don't want to go over the pins is because if the needle hits the pin, you could break a needle, it could fly, you could break the pin, but worst case scenario is you jam the timing of the machine and it doesn't sew properly for you. Okay, that's it. So if we come back and take a peek at, where we eased it in, we can still sort of see, right, that the skirt part is a little puckery, but when we come over here to the other side, that seam is nice and smooth. right? We're gonna iron that out and it's gonna be perfect, okay? So that's how we ease that waistband in. Okay, now I'm gonna come over here and I'm going to do some seam grading. So I'm gonna come in at an angle with my scissors and I'm cutting at 1/4 of an inch, right? I'm trimming this excess off. So I'm gonna go all the way around my skirt. Again, see how I just laid it down and my waistband kind of folded back? I wanna make sure there's nothing underneath where I'm cutting. And again, because my skirt is tubular, I'm really only gonna cut a couple inches. Maybe from seam to seam, I'll go from seam to seam. And then I'm gonna put my scissors down. Make sure there is nothing underneath where I'm cutting. Cut another couple inches. Now, if you are not ready to eyeball what a 1/4 inch is, you can absolutely draw this line out first. I'm cutting 1/4 inches from the seam that I sewed, right? Not my stay stitch, the seam that I sewed. The stay stitch is only in my skirt. And I could take it out if I wanted. It can stay there. It doesn't have to stay there. It's really important that you take your time with kind of like setting up what you need to do. So I'm setting that skirt nice and flat. Okay. So now I'm going to go press this seam up, okay, and then I'm going to do zippers.